everybody. Happy Tuesday. Welcome to episode 24 of the Light After Trauma podcast. I am your host, Alyssa Scolari, and this is the first episode that we are recording in 2021. It'll be the second episode to launch. So today is Wednesday, January 6th when we're recording, but it's going to be launching on Tuesday, January. Oh, what the heck is next Tuesday? The 12th? I think it's the 12th. Anyway, regardless, I have with me here today a good friend. We're going to be talking about some hard stuff, talking about grief today with my dear friend, Toni Uzzalino. That's the Italian way of saying it. Am I right?
Uzzalino.
That's isn't that Americanized?
Yeah, it was actually a misspelling. There's very few people with that it's spelled that way.
Really?
Yes. And most people that I've met with the last name, it was my husband's and they were related to him.
Well, okay. I love your last name because it just screams Italian and I'm obsessed. And obviously, as I said that to all the listeners out there, I did like the Italian hand motion. So you've got two Italians coming at you today and hopefully we love to talk with our hands. So we're going to try not to like smack things around. I know I'm definitely guilty of like smacking the table in a fit of passion when we're talking about this stuff. But so welcome, Toni. How are you? Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here.
I am so stoked to have you. So can you tell the listeners a little bit about what you do?
Sure. Do you want me to go into like history or just kind of like what I do right now?
Well, let's start off on, I guess, to be more specific, because one of the things that is so interesting about your story is you are in the field of mental health. You are an LPC, so you are a therapist, but you did not start out that way. So take us back to like what your career was versus what it is now, because you did a total 180.
Absolutely. I was an accountant working in financial services, and then a trauma had affected my family, which kind of caused me to my whole life to be in an uproar. Took me a couple of years to kind of settle down until I found a therapist to help one of my family members. It was an art therapist. One day I was looking at something, she was explaining something to me, and I said, I can do this. And she said, you should. You'd be great at it. So I decided to go back to school at 35, and I had to get my prerequisites for grad school. But I wound up going to Caldwell and getting a master's degree in counseling psychology with a specialization in art therapy.
Specialization. I actually didn't even know that. So you have a specialization in art therapy.
Yes, but my degree is in counseling psychology, kind of a new degree to the school, actually it's the only one in New Jersey that is accredited. And I was there while they were getting accredited. So it was a little challenging to get my LPC. Actually, I got denied on my LAC. They said I needed a counseling course. The whole degree was in counseling, but I just kind of like went with it. And I said, let me just accumulate my hours. And when I did that, I started, friends of mine kind of said, oh, I got my LPC. And I tried it and they'd question one thing, but it was such a little thing. And all of a sudden they said, congratulations. So I wound up getting it a little bit later than I thought, but that was okay.
Yeah. It can be such a pain in the butt to go from like the LAC, which to the listeners out there, like the LAC is kind of like your provisional license where you have to be under supervision and you can't practice on your own. And you have to get like right now it's like 4,500 hours under a supervisor that has to be approved by the board. It's a nightmare, not to deter anybody from going into the field because it's a blessing to be in this field, but yeah, it's such a pain in the ass, quite frankly. Now, going back to, you said that there was this trauma in your life that sort of shifted, ultimately like catapulted you into a new career. What had happened?
Well, June. I guess it started more February. I was married with two little kids, 3 and 7. My husband's father had died pretty suddenly. They were very, very close. We actually all were very close. That kind of, I guess, was the first event. It kind of shook us up, and the next couple of months are a blur. And then my husband kind of went to sleep one night and he didn't wake up. He was 36. And
so young.
Yep. And I woke up to see that he hadn't. And that kind of was the start, I guess, of the events that led to me kind of going back to school.
Oh my gosh. And you were how old at this time? So you had to be in your 30s?
Yes, I was 31.
At 31 years old, you had been married for how many years?
9.5. It was June 25th of 1999. And my birthday was in July.
Oh. And he did not wake up.
Nope.
And before that, so his father had passed.
Yes.
And it sounds like, was that like a series of events that ultimately led to your husband's passing?
I believe so. And of course, thinking back, hindsight, it's quite amazing. He struggled with his health, which was similar to his dad. And he seemed to always be sick with one thing or another, from an injury when he was younger to, infections that lasted months at a time, being on workman's comp and then getting a job. And so it was always pretty much a challenge, but he also had high blood pressure and he put on quite a bit of weight suddenly with his dad's passing. And I think that contributed greatly to the events that led up to his death.
Do you attribute the sudden onset of like weight gain to just the unprocessed feelings around his father's passing?
Yeah, I think he had like some unresolved stuff that he needed to deal with. And I believe I don't even know how to put this into words. Like, I believe that you are able to, I don't know how to put this into words.
What are you trying to say? Like,
I felt like because he had some guilt, some, like unresolved feelings, that it kind of like haunted him, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of led, of course, depression, and the combination.
And I mean, I'm a firm believer there's such a strong mind-body connection. And it goes back to, and I think you had read this book. I don't know if you finished it, but Bessel van der Kolk's The Body Keeps the Score. So is that similar to what you're trying to say, where you sort of feel like he took all of the feelings and just stored them? Because if you don't do anything with them, they sit in your body, and that leads to health complications. It leads to weight gain. It leads to a whole host of issues, which can be fatal.
Yes. And I think it was so many years, like kind of after the fact, kind of looking back, I think like when I first met him, he was actually related to my cousin's husband. So I kind of met his family before I met him, because he was always away at school. But like thinking back, he had a loss of a sibling when he was young. And I really think that some of it kind of even goes back as far as that.
Absolutely. And back then, things were less discussed. And it wasn't, especially being a man, it was not okay to talk about feelings. So,
yes. And an Italian man.
Oh, absolutely. That's like the nail in the coffin. Italian man, feelings. We don't talk about that. We provide for the family, and that's it.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's so tough. And I don't know if you said this while we were recording, but this is one thing I do know, is that you have children with him. So how old were your kids when your husband passed?
3.5 and 7.5. One was with me that night and one wasn't, which was some of the trauma piece of it. And it was very complex. because of that.
Could you say a little bit more about that? You don't have to if you don't want to. Feel free to tell me no.
Well, one wasn't there, and I think there was some feelings about that, like not being there to help. And the other one was there, but was very young and kind of internalized like the responsibility of his death to her. She blamed herself.
As kids do.
It wasn't till years and years and years later did we realize that. But thankfully, through our therapy and, processing things, took a little bit of a different route in life, but both are successful adults. Now they're 25 and 29.
Wow.
And both doing really good.
It makes so much sense what you say about how your kids internalized it and processed it in different ways, right? You had your one child who was there and, was more than likely thinking like, well, what could I have done? Or what did I do that caused this to happen? And then you have the child who wasn't there, who jumps right to, well, it's because I wasn't there. If I was there, this wouldn't have happened. And that can be so hard, so difficult. So you're 31 years old. You've got 2 small children. Your husband passes away. You are now a grieving widow. How are you still standing? What were those years like for you?
Extremely, extremely challenging.
Oh my God, I can't even imagine.
Yeah, some days I look back and I think it seems like yesterday. And then some days it seems like 100 years ago. They were total ups and downs. I did have, an education and a job. And it's kind of even difficult to put into words. It definitely was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. That is for definite sure.
So how did you ended up going back to work to be an accountant after your husband passed?
No, I already was an accountant.
Or I was right, but you ended up going back to work as an accountant.
Oh, yes. I worked for a money manager. I was kind of in marketing. It was a small firm. And then a few years later, I was laid off because they were taken over and they were moving back into the city. And by now, I just definitely could not do, be in the city with the kids here, especially with going. I was like always on the go and I just couldn't do it. So I wind up, taking some time off, and then September 11th happened. So like the unemployment kind of, extended and kind of helped. It helped during a difficult time.
Wow. Not to mention, right, that's a whole nother trauma in itself, especially because you are like close to New York. So that's a whole nother trauma. Looking back at that time, like during those years, how did you manage, or are there even words to describe how you managed to put one foot in front of the other as somebody who's grieving the loss of her husband and trying to also be there for your kids?
I can't put it quite into words, but there's some friends I lost because of the death, believe it or not. Some that I thought really would be there for me and they weren't. And that's okay. And then I remember sitting at the repast lunch and one woman was saying how she lost all of her friends when she lost her husband, because now she was the single one, like kind of like maybe going after their husbands. And I remember telling my sitter who watched the kids, and she started laughing, hysterical, because she's like, wait a second, are you saying that you think? And she kind of, gave their names. And then I'm like, yeah, you're right. That's so silly. But yeah, my husband had really, really good friends and they've helped me throughout the years. And if, we're not too close now, but I know if I needed something,
yep,
they'd be there.
They'd be there in a heartbeat. That is just, it's horrific and yet not surprising to me that there are, of course, people out there who, because you're the single one, right? Oh, we're gonna exclude her because she's gonna come and steal our husbands or be a home wrecker. Like, oh my God. It's
just totally idiotic.
It's hysterical in the most like disturbing way possible. What is wrong with people?
Yeah. But it's amazing how my life changed so much. I wind up, we were thinking about moving anyway. He had an extremely stressful job, my husband, because he worked with his father. So when I went to work to keep my mind busy, he went to work and everybody would come up to him and say, I'm sorry about your dad. I'm sorry about your dad. So we relived it over and over. And I was able, because on my birthday, which was in July, I got a call from the office and they called already to say happy birthday. And then they called me and we had gotten into this program that we were trying to get in for a few years. And I realized when I went there, that was the first time I didn't have the thought that I was a widow. And it was only 2-3 weeks later. And that's when I realized I needed to go back to work and get back to a sense of normal, whatever the normal would be.
You said that was only 2 to 3 weeks after you had lost your husband.
Yes.
Wow.
Yep. Yeah. So my boss was really cool. He's like, you do what you got to do, whatever you need to do. And that was very helpful. And I don't really remember too much, about when I went back to work. I know the years were extremely difficult. Like I was like constantly on the go for
trying
one
to
thing
keep
or
busy.
another. Yeah, well, did a full-time job, house, the kids, their schedules, you didn't have that other partner to kind of pick up some of the slack. And he did. He had picked them up from the sitters and from school and things like that. So I kind of lost that, but I met a bunch of moms at my son's school and they kind of said, listen, I know your husband used to do this. We're going to do this, for you. And they kind of picked up the same schedule almost for a while. And it was great.
That?
They were great. I was, like I said, there's people that touched me that I was surprised. And then other people that were disappointing that they didn't.
People always say that when it comes to like grief and loss. I had a friend, not that this is not similar in any way, shape, or form, but I have a childhood friend who just recently lost her father. And she said the same thing. I went to the viewing, it was New Year's Day. And she had said to me, like, Alyssa, you would be so surprised at the people who are there for you that you don't expect to be. And then the people who you expect to be there for you and just aren't. And part of me wonders if like, because death and loss and grief is such a difficult subject to talk about, do you think it's because it hits too close to home for some people and they're like, I don't know what to say, so I'm just going to stay away? Not that that's an excuse, because I think that that's a bunch of bullshit and it infuriates me, but I wonder if that's part of the reason.
Possibly. I know my husband was really close with people that he worked with because he has had like a brotherly connection with some of them. And I remember one in particular was on vacation when Peter died, and he drove up and he left his wife who had vision problems. He left her there, with the kids. And he said, I got to run back. I'm like, thank you for coming. Really appreciate it. He goes, I don't know how I'm ever going to get over this. And that kind of was like, whoa, And then another friend that he also worked with, I was shocked. I mean, we went on vacations together and kind of disappeared. And then I wouldn't return my call. And then one day I got his wife and he got on the phone and he says, when I talk to you or I see you, I see Pete and I can't do it. And
thanks.
Like, yeah, thanks. But I also kind of like respect people to be wherever they need to be. There's nothing I can do, I was like, okay, but the support that I've gotten in the communities, we were looking to move anyway. I just switched where we were looking. I decided to move where his brother and sister both live in towns that had good schools. And I wound up moving to Ridgewood, which was a great move. I wanted the kids to be near their cousins. So he winds up being in school with them, different grades, but it was a good opportunity. But the support that I received in the community the coaches, the football coaches, the wrestling coaches, they became like my family. And and it was, I mean, I've gone out to dinner with two couples. They would get round tables so I didn't feel funny.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And, and things like that. So it's, I had that, but what was really hard was when he graduated high school, it ended. So it was really, it was difficult, and I guess I didn't think that far in advance.
Well, no, of course not. But right, he graduates high school and then it's like, oh, where's that sense of community that I felt like I was so much a part of?
Yeah, because my daughter was on a different track. So it was, the community was with his, kind of his sporting events and activities more so than my daughter's. So it was very different. But we made it through. We wound up moving again to kind of lessen the, because my son was going to be away, we kind of moved to a town that had townhouses. So I moved, kind of way to downsize. And that was a great move also. So life became a little bit simpler.
And I think what you're talking about also speaks to the fact that grief is so cyclical, right? It's not at all right. So, 3 weeks after your husband passed, you're like, it hits you for the first time, like, oh, I am so much more than just a widow. It's time for me to go back to work. But then here we are all these years later, your son graduates high school and that sense of community is kind of taken out from under your feet. And it's like, boom, there's that sense of loss that I feel. So it's not something that goes away. It's not something to get over, right? Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I think it becomes like part of you and you just kind of move forward in a different way. I remember reading something, when he died, it's like life is changed. It's not ended. It becomes a different, it's almost like it reworks itself and it looks different. And at times, much more challenging. And at times okay. I remember walking with a friend of mine from town, and she was talking about her husband, never being around. He's always working. And then she says, "Oh my God, you must hate me." And I went, "Why?" I said, because I was thinking. And then she's like, "You must hate me. You never have this problem. And here I am bitching that he's, working too much when he's home at night and you're alone." And I'm like, I said, "No, I just didn't know what to say."
Yeah.
Because I didn't ever go through that. My husband was working or home and that was it. So it, wasn't I also don't want people to not be able to talk to me about things that are bothering them. It's a relationship is two ways. It's not just, I don't want people to have to censor the things they discuss with me.
And that's what makes you such a good therapist, right? And was there a point in your life where you didn't feel that way, where you were kind of like, nope, don't talk to me about your husband. Don't talk to me about what's going on in your life. My world is falling apart. Or did you never really feel that way?
Right after he died, I had put a couple of months later, I put the kids into a treatment program at Valley Hospital, had an art therapy program. And what in the beginning was people was "Oh, you have to go to grief groups." So I would go, and I remember my friend dragged me there, and I went there, and there's people at my table that were grieving the losses of their 90-year-old mothers. And I just was like, hello, nothing in common here. And although I was young and younger than most people I met, the mothers of who also lost husbands were very, very helpful to me, because those people, they were able to help me. Some were losses that were, a little bit, longer in time. So they, went through it and were able to help me, and we helped each other. We actually became support systems for each other, whether it being picking the kids up from school, or they kind of filled a little bit of a void that was there. And I really needed that for a long time. And then I think I eased into I don't want to be defined as a widow. I had to like just recreate my life, and my life looks so different. I know when I talk about my story and I tell people, when that therapist has said, that you can do this, I felt like, when the pitches come together and you step back and you see this big picture, it was like my life. And I just said that, like, this is what like God wants me to do. Like, I'm destined to do this. And it was challenging because it was hard on my family to be in school. I mean, then I wasn't working some of the time, and then I was working, but our family still was struggling. So it was, when I went to grad school, I learned so much, like so much about my childhood, my family, why I do certain things, why I am who I am. And that was pretty helpful because even now it's like, I don't think I could have be where I am today without that.
Yes, because you have to understand it. You have to understand it to be able to help yourself and help others.
Yeah. And I tell people all the time, like when I talk about therapy, and I say, I think everybody needs therapy.
Everybody.
Life is challenging. And to have somebody who is only, and one time I said life is hard, and they're like, oh, it's not hard. It's, it's what you make of it. And I'm like, it's challenging.
Bullshit. Life is hard.
Look at the world we live in.
Yeah.
Right now, it's incredible, and I really think everybody should to be in it. And I talk about that, often because I go weekly, the best hour of my life.
It's the best. It's absolutely the best. I can't wait to see my therapist tomorrow.
Yep. My therapist was sick yesterday, so she had to reschedule. So I'm like waiting to hear from her. But she's the best, and it's like, sometimes she'll say something. She goes, wait, what happens if your client would say that to you?
Oh, I hate that question.
Yeah. And I'm like, you know what? But it makes sense.
Yes.
It's like, she would help me see the other side of the, as sitting in the chair and being the other person.
Yes.
So, but my life wasn't quite what I thought it would be then, because it was the kids. I thought I would work with kids when I graduated, but my first job was in a rehab, working at a mommy and me rehab in Patterson. And I loved it. Just because you have an addiction, just because you have a mental health problem, doesn't mean you cannot be a good parent.
Absolutely.
And I feel extremely strong about that. And even throughout all these years, I still come back to that same thing. And I, I have a private practice now, just starting to go on my own with it. But one thing that helped me through grad school was doing supervised parenting in Bergen County. And that is keeping me, especially since this pandemic hit, keeping me very, very busy.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I go back to the same thing. It's like these parents need someone there for them at this time. Of course, everybody's working to not need someone there, but I feel like it's a way to help parents, like some help I received from, all my grief, from friends and, professionals and all that.
I was just thinking, as you're telling me kind of what you do and where your career is at now. So, because you're in the process of building up your own private practice and you do the supervised parenting time, and look at you, how you are what this podcast is all about, which is look at how you have taken the pain. And pain isn't even a good word because there are no words to describe the horror that you've endured. No words for it. And look at how you have taken that and you are now using it to help others. Like supervised parenting time, look at that.
Yeah.
You have become what you needed back then. I hope you're so proud of yourself.
Absolutely.
You're like, I'm trying. Work in progress.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm going to be proud because it's just amazing. And, one of the things, this has stuck with me because just so the listeners out there know, Toni and I had talked a little bit about this before recording when we were kind of just prepping for this. You had offered a piece of advice to people out there who have lost a spouse. And it hit me right in the gut. And I was wondering if you would be able to share.
The best thing, I don't know if someone told me it, I wish I remembered, or I just realized it. But, when you lose a spouse, most people sleep on the same side of the bed all the time, the majority of people. But to wake up and then look to see an empty space every time you open up your eyes to wake up in the morning. So you switch sides. Because if you're sleeping on their side, it's a different view than you ordinarily would have. So it's not your first thought. Yeah, it's probably your second thought, but it's not your first thought. And that was really helpful to me. And I suggest that to everyone that I know. That's my advice. Another thing which was really, really, really hard was the holidays, that first holiday or, second holiday, because I had to go through with, kids that, that are kids and they needed, Santa Claus. But I couldn't do the tree thing. And thank God I had my friend that I work with, I love. She brought trees for each of my kids with decorations, and they each decorated their own tree because we still had to go on for them. And that's something people have also used, like when I had, said that they've used with it, because the kids still need that, but I can't do it. I couldn't do it. So she did it for me. And that is, definitely love her for that.
You allowed somebody to come in and keep the magic alive for your kids at a time where you're in so much pain. You just don't have the space for it. So you were able to take care of yourself and honor yourself while also taking care of your kids.
Yeah. And then I remember also I had a little bit more time on my hands. So I was teaching CCD. And she was actually my realtor. She made me go out Christmas shopping for my kids. I really, really struggled that first Christmas. And so she was going, what about this? What about this? What about this? My little Jewish, friend who was, picking Christmas presents for my kids. But I was able to do it. And then I remember going into a religious store because I needed something for the CCD class. And I saw something on the wall, and it was a poem on the face of Jesus. And it talked about very similar to footprints in the sand, when you needed me, I carried you. This was more like the person got to heaven and said, listen, when I needed you, I prayed to you and you didn't come to me. You didn't feed me when I was hungry. You didn't. And then he said, but I gave you people. Yeah. Why didn't you recognize that it was from me? And that was a turning point of my depression. And I was like, you know what? It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. And there was, a couple of other kind of instances, similar to that, but it's I get it, it's not always what you think it's going to be, but it's, what you need. And everybody has a purpose in this lifetime. And I feel helping people is my purpose.
Yeah. And you are so good at it. So good at it. One of the good things that has come out of this pandemic is I was able to meet Toni through what would you call it? A peer supervision group, basically.
That's exactly what I call it. I go, my supervision is Sunday morning from 9 to 10, and I'm not doing anything during that time, no matter where I am. I'm on vacation. I'm sitting, it's because it's really, really helpful to me because it's in my community.
Yeah.
I don't really have that. I have some friends that are therapists that, that I can kind of reach out to, but everybody's so busy that this is a set time and everybody has their own thing to bring to the table. And I've always focused on the trauma piece of it. And then that's your thing. So it's I feel like it's a way. So, we're always in contact with each other.
Even if we just hop on Sunday mornings and talk about the weather, I am always learning from all of you. It's been such a blessing.
Absolutely. Yeah. I tell everybody that. I said, it hasn't, that's one of the good things, because I would have never met you guys. You're all like all over the state.
Never. You and I live hours from each other, I'm pretty sure. So we would have never met, if it hadn't been for COVID. So now your practice, are you currently accepting new clients?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, of course, we're still virtual, and I kind of think that'll be for
it's going to be for a good while, I would say.
Yeah, especially that I see kids, with play, I, kind of following how, if anybody in the country is in the office, and just it's a challenge to, to keep everything clean. And, so I'm kind of like, it's going to be virtual for a while.
Oh, yeah. And you work with children and adults?
Yes. I work with children, adults, families, parents. I do a lot of parent like coaching and assistance, because it is hard, especially with any children that have mental health issues, or, sometimes it's the parents that have the mental health issues and the kids are kind of experience from as a result of that. And I can definitely relate to that.
And is there a specific area that you prefer to work in? Like, are you particularly passionate about children with like the separation anxiety or grief, like trauma?
I wind up, because I was working in a rehab. I got licensed in addiction. So besides the mental health and addiction and, our therapy, I study, and I'm very passionate about play therapy and kind of going for my certification. But I also think that, families, no matter what the challenges are, some of them, if you take it, the feelings are the same. So, and treating them, is very similar. So, but trauma always is like my, the underlying passion, because I feel like that's what led me
that
here.
Is your trauma is what led you to the spot to be able to help so many others.
Yeah. And when I was doing in homework with a lot of the agencies, and I like the very young kids, when so many people don't work with them, but I enjoy the 4-year-olds or 5-year-olds.
Oh, that's amazing. And if people want to contact you, can they just go right to your website?
Absolutely. It's Toni Uzzalino, LPC.com. There's a lot of information up there about, parenting and parenting supervision, and addiction. And
I will link that in the show notes and on the private Facebook group for everybody. And then I think the last question I want to ask you is like a book recommendation. Is there any kind of book? And if you're like, I have no idea, it's totally fine.
It might be kind of like out there, but the one book that I read that really helped me was James von Prague, his book, which was, he's a psychic. I know it sounds a little bit out there. Yeah. And I can't think which particular book, but there was a story. They were like stories of different people he've met over the years and different readings he did. So I mean, there has to be a life after this. I mean, come on, this can't be it. I truly believe there is. It's controversial on what it is, because no one really knows. But I have to believe that it's a better world than this. Better. So I remember reading a story about a girl who's was very close to a grandmother, and the grandmother died. And the reading, she talked about a footstool that was moved a certain way. And it had me thinking that they're here, they're around, they're here when you need them. And I truly believe that. Like when I started dating Sirius, which was my daughter's idea, I met someone, and, the first date we went on was strange, because he was talking about his kids and the grief of ending his marriage when they were little and the struggles he had. And I just was like, wow, like you kind of get some of the things I went, I've been through.
Gets it to a certain extent.
So, yeah. And I believe it was, like kind of fate almost, like how I met him, because his family knew my husband's family, because they like grew up in the same town. So it was like he worked for one of my husband's cousins. Wow. And, so it was very like, I felt like kind of I don't know, destined. And then he struggled during, I mean, we've been dating for years now, and he lost his son. And I felt like I was able to help him and help the family kind of during his illness and then his death. And I felt I was able to, from my experience, kind of help him and his family, kind of through
Isn't
it.
that so, I don't know, it's so fascinating to me how that works. It's when you hear stories like that, it is very hard to deny the fact that there's something much bigger than us and there's something after this life.
Right. And you got to be like just kind of aware on what it is.
100%. 100%.
Yeah. And just another thing, you were talking about like kind of recommendations, if you have any, thoughts. I remember it's September 11th and I was at a church meeting and the priest came down and he's like, we're going to do, keep all these women that lost their husbands, be good, good to them and extra this. And then someone else is like, well, I'm going to give them gift baskets for Christmas, hand cream and lotions. I said, listen, these people don't want lotions. They want someone to help them Christmas shop for their kids. They want someone to help them run errands. Like, not lotion. They can buy freaking lotion.
Right. Your hand lotion, not doing shit for me. Right. I need hands.
Honestly, it doesn't do shit for me on a regular day. It's just not my thing. It's not everybody's thing. And that's what I thought. And I, remembered, my friend who, made me go. She literally made me go. Pick me up and said, get in the car now. We're going.
I'm so thankful you had such a good support group, because I think that also is what helped you to just be where you're at right now in terms of a place where you're able to now give back. I thank you for coming on here and being so vulnerable. I know it's really difficult to talk about, but I think that a lot of people will resonate with a lot of the stuff that you're saying. So thank you. I truly appreciate it.
Yep. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to contact me. You can do it through the website. I'd be happy to, help anyone. I remember a few years after my husband passed, the funeral director had a couple of mothers that, lost their husbands suddenly, like accidents, had little kids. And they said, I want to talk to somebody who has been through this, not somebody who's older and did it, somebody who can. So I've, connected and helped out felt like it was giving back.
Yeah.
So to kind of talk to the mothers, and I'm like, listen, you may not think that you're ever going to get through this, but you just, you have to. People go, I would never be able to do this. You would, because you would have to do it for your children and, your family, because there's enough loss, now. So you just got to go ahead, and here it is. I think it's going to be 22 years in June.
And look at you now.
Yeah.
You're a rock star.
You're sweet.
Thanks for listening, everyone. For more information about today's episode and to sign up for the Light After Trauma newsletter, head over to my website at alyssascolari.com. The really great thing about being a part of this newsletter is that not only do you get weekly updates on new podcast episodes and blog posts, but you also get access to the private Facebook community, as well as access to all sorts of insider tips, resources, and infographics that supplement what we talk about on the show. You also can connect with me and other trauma warriors. I'm super active on the Facebook community, and I look forward to talking with you.